A goodly thing, if the children of us all could dwell together in peace. That's pretty good. Let's try doing it as a round and see how that goes. So we'll all start together, and then let's have. So we'll all sing together a "What a Goodly Thing," and then let's have this quadrant of the room fall back to "Oh, what a goodly thing," and then this quadrant of the room fall back to "Oh, what a goodly thing," and then this quadrant of the room fall back to "Oh, what a goodly thing." Does that somewhat make sense? And then this quadrant is just going to sing it straight through the whole way, and we'll try singing it through twice. We'll see where God takes us. Okay, let's try it out and see what happens. Oh, what a goodly thing! Oh, what a goodly thing! Oh, what a goodly thing! Oh, what
at 8:30, which will be in the same place as the bonfire last night. And now, I have the honor of introducing Mr. Evan Welkin, the Executive Secretary of the Friends World Committee for Consultation section of the Americas. After Rachel's introduction earlier, Dave Hansen came up. He's going to introduce me on Thursday. He was like, Tom, I'm not going to do as good a job as Rachel. And I told him, don't worry, I'm not going to do as good a job as Rachel either. So, Evan has been on the job as the Executive Secretary for about a year now. And before that, he and his family, who are with us here, were living in Italy and worked for the section for Europe and Africa. And she did a lot of community organizing and popular education. He's been doing a lot of work that's been tied to Quakerism for a long time. He's a Gilbert College graduate, and it's a real pleasure to have him with us tonight. He grew up in the same Friends meeting as my wife, Jade, and he's now her boss. So he's kind of like distant family. And I think it's going to be really wonderful. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. I'm going to figure out how to orient myself here. At dinner, Dan Bean asked me, so do you know most people here? And I had to rightly say, no, I don't actually know many of you, which as a community organizer can be a little, create some nervousness. But I am hoping, because we're in a camp setting, to offer you all a little bit of sort of interactive as well as homework between now and the next time that I'm going to speak tomorrow evening. So, the first thing that I want us to reflect on is our theme. So because we haven't read it out yet, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity to read it for us all. Our theme for this gathering is Romans 12, 1 through 2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now, I am not a biblical scholar, nor a preacher even, but when I hear those words, I admit it's a little intimidating. So what I hope to do over the next 2 evenings is sort of unpack that verse, which we've chosen as our theme, and hopefully offer some opportunity for us to explore it a little bit more deeply. So as a first step to that, I'd actually like to break us again into small groups as we did last night. And I'm going to invite us to get into groups of 4 or 5. And maybe as I continue to give you the prompt, you can begin to kind of look around you. Hopefully the chairs are not attached as they were. You can just sit, turn back towards people behind you, and aim for 4 or 5 in a group if you don't mind. And then I'll tell you the next step. Are folks online here? All right, are we more or less at our room? Yes. Okay, great.
Bill, it sounds like the sound started working again. So
Excellent.
somebody told me it wasn't, and then
It wasn't, yeah.
they just said it was, so that's good.
So, as I say, I find, and this is a verse that we have used often in Quaker circles, but I find it challenging. Some of the words that stick out for me from this are making our bodies as a sacrifice, and do not conform to the pattern of this world, and transform by renewing our mind, and testing and approving God's will. But my first question to you all in a small group is, where would you start with that? So I'm going to give you just 2-3 minutes. It's all on your programs as well, if you want to look at it while you're thinking about it. But where would we start with this particular verse that we've chosen for our annual session?
Where would we start?
There's no definitive answer that you need to come up with here. This is just beginning to get the ball rolling for us. Give it maybe 1 more minute. All right, let's bring our attention back up. Wrap up your thoughts and come back here with us. All right. You'll have one more question, so a little bit more time to talk to you. All right. So can folks give me a few examples of things that came up in your group? Any thoughts?
I was the only one who had to do it there.
I'll give you a little bit more time on the next question.
I can't talk about it though, because I might not be about me. I'm recently retired as a pastor, and putting my body in location near my family that is struggling with declining mental and physical health. So I'm that seems fairly in line with presenting my body as a living sacrifice.
Okay, all right. So that piece particularly stuck out. Okay. Others? Yeah.
So we understood the question being, where do you begin?
Sure. So the next question I'd like to ask is that we've chosen from this passage themes of transformation and renewal. And so I'm hearing that in what was shared here. But I'd like us to then specifically think a little bit more about how we recognize a transformative experience. So taking this phrase, taking what sticks out maybe first for us, but even in your own life, less from the passage now, this is more your own personal experience. How do you recognize a transformational experience? And I'm going to give you 5 minutes this time. So try to get a chance for each person to explore. Maybe it's just something that comes to mind immediately, or maybe you need a little bit more time to think about it, but how do you recognize a transformative experience? Give yourself a couple more minutes. Try to come to the end of your phrase or thought. If your group is already ready, you can move back more, face forward in a space that's more comfortable. If not, you all can just continue your thought in your group. Thank you, friends. I'm curious to hear reflections on that second question. How do you recognize transformative or transformational experience? Hindsight.
Change of behavior.
Change of behavior. Other characteristics that help you know. Yeah. Oh, okay. So does the desire change come first or the behavior? Okay. All right. Getting back to that question of where we start, both with our scripture, but also this question of transformation. Other reflections, thoughts, and groups?
Change of commitment.
Change of commitment. So desire change come first. Okay. Excellent.
Priorities.
Change of priorities. Okay. Other thoughts?
So the passage talks about being transformed by the renewing of the mind. And so what are some ways in which our mind can become obsessed or latch onto the destructive messages about ourselves, resentment towards others, and how our thought processes is wrapped up in that, and the transformation is whether we're able to let that go and have that mind be renewed and be fixated on
So kind of breaking that pattern.
breaking that
Excellent, excellent. Which reminds me that the friend in the back on our first question spoke about moving her body into a place. Sort of, be it mentally or even physically, taking our passage from Romans, we're moving mentally or physically into a new space. Not to pick on Bob or the biblical passage analysis, but I think if we then place that into a broader context, there may be much more there. But I'm hearing a number of pieces from what people have shared about personal experiences and how we kind of get past or change our way of thinking or move our bodies or change our thoughts in order to begin a process of transformation. So what I'm going to offer over these next 2 evenings is 2 parts. I think to consider this passage from Romans, I'm going to invite us into 2 other pieces of scripture to explore this evening an emphasis on personal transformation and preparing ourselves for personal transformation, while tomorrow we'll focus more on the community or group process, which I'm calling a sort of stewarding of community transformation. And so this evening, I want to share in particular some of my own experiences, but also important experiences that I've had the privilege of sharing with others that I think speak to this question of preparing ourselves for transformation. So the scripture I'd like to focus our consideration on this evening is from 1 Kings 19. It's 11 and 12. And it's the story of Elijah speaking with God in the cave. And Elijah's at this point of real discouragement in his ministry. He's basically hiding out, ready to give up. And he's asking God for proof. He's asking God for encouragement. And this is what God ultimately offers him. And so in verses 11 and 12, it says, and he said, "Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. I'm hearing a
Sorry.
no problem. It's a still small voice, indeed.
That's a still small voice.
This is again another passage that we cite many times in Quaker circles. But for me, it really spoke to how I have reflected for myself about those moments where I recognize transformation in my life, often in retrospect, often not at the time. But because at the time, I'm frequently struggling. I'm frequently dealing with the earthquake, the fire, that big change, which may provoke me moving my body, my changing of my mind, but I'm not always conscious. I'm not always being the one to make the first move. And so Elijah on the mountain obviously has been very faithful in his work as a prophet. He is discouraged, but willing to continue, being encouraged to continue. And in some ways, I hear that this passage is telling him and us that we need to not just wait for those dramatic, traumatic experiences, but that the Lord is speaking to us also in those still small experiences. And so I'd like that to be the center of our reflection this evening as I share a little bit about my own path towards standing for you today and some important people that were able to direct me to where I am today. So I am the Executive Secretary of the Friends World Committee for Consultation, as Tom shared before. It has been a long path to reaching this point. But I originally came up in Olympia monthly meeting, in North Pacific yearly meeting in Washington State, where I have now returned today. I've lived for the last 10 years or so in Italy and served friends there. But my path to being a professional friend really began as a Guilford College student in Greensboro, North Carolina. When it was time to decide which colleges I would go to, I was led to go to a Quaker school, and I wasn't sure exactly which one. Indiana was an option, but I had a little bit more of a nudge to go to Guilford College, and I remember very vividly in my interview with the Quaker Leadership Scholars Program that they asked me on the phone, so are you an FGC Quaker or an FUM Quaker or an EFI Quaker? And then the phones were like this in those days. I set it off to the side. I turned to my mom and I said, Mom, are we FGC or FUM Quakers? Because out west, we do have Quakers of many kinds, but we're maybe a little less versed in the diversity. And said she didn't know either. So I just said, I think I'm just a Quaker. But so began my education. I arrived at Guilford College, and a really important part of the work of that program is explaining and educating young adult friends in all of that variety and diversity of Quakerism. So I not only was exposed in Greensboro to several different meetings from each of those branches right there around the college campus, but there were also friends from Ramallah in my class, and friends from Kenya in my class. And that had a profound impact on me as I began to kind of explore this wider breadth and range of Quaker experience. In my last year of Guilford, we were encouraged to do a capstone project. And my project was to organize a traveling ministry, an intervisitation, we call it now. Did not at the time. And Dan's brother, Max, was my advisor that year. And yes, I heard uh-oh. Many people know Max well. He was an incredibly charismatic and energetic force. And he encouraged me to go out and explore Quakers firsthand, much more broadly than I had even explored up until that time. And so what you see here on this map in front of me here is what became my first experience of intervisitation. So before I get too far down that path, intervisitation may not be a term that all of us are familiar with. Is that a word that means something to friends? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. So it's been a very important part of Quaker history for us to go out beyond our own meetings, beyond even our own Quaker communities, to speak to the other, to connect with people who are different than ourselves. Even in the early days of Quakerism, try to convert the Sultan or the Pope, which was not successful, but it was. I did think of that when recently the Pope passed, and people said, "Oh, our Quaker Pope passed." And I said, "Oh, we've never been very successful." But I was really called to try this experience of traveling in the ministry. I had more biblical scholarship at that time in QLSP than ever at any point in my life. As an unprogrammed friend, that was not a significant part of my upbringing. But in some ways, this example of Elijah, the wandering prophet, really did speak to me in that time. And so, not to compare myself in any way to him, but making perhaps some of the same mistakes he did. Unlike early friends, I did not choose a traveling companion, as I probably should have. Like him, I went probably far, far outside of my best comfort zone. I chose to take my journey on a motorcycle, which Max did not recommend. I will not get him blamed for that. And I really set off with this incredibly ambitious goal. And my goal was to, and I wrote this out in a letter of introduction to those meetings all up and down the East Coast from Maine to Florida. But my goal was to try to explore the geographic differences and ways in which friends' theology and meeting houses and culture might be affected by where they were along the Eastern Seaboard. So I wrote to many, many meetings. I received a much smaller number of responses. In my 20-something hubris, I was discouraged that people did not understand exactly what I was trying to say here. But now I look back and cringe a bit. But I was really encouraged by those who did respond and were excited by this idea and indeed responded with this sense of saying, "Oh, well, yes, this is an invitation. We'd love to have you and hear what you have to share." And so I did. I organized my journey and set off from Guilford here, right at this point in the map, and began to make my way down south to begin my journey in St. Petersburg, Florida. And the reason I began in Florida was because one of my first responses to my invitation, to my letter, was an invitation from a woman named Jerry Groupé, who was enthusiastic to host me in St. Petersburg. And so really with no business taking a trip as long as I did, I set off from Greensboro on my motorcycle down all the way to meet Jerry in St. Petersburg. And I drove up to her apartment, and she greeted me at the door. She was in her mid-80s at the time. And she began to tell me about some of her life. And this was my very first intervisitation exploration. And she was an amazing person. She was a longtime member of the St. Petersburg meeting and a biochemist. So one of the country's first female biochemists, actually. And she began to tell me about the amazing travels that she had made, the amazing work that she had done in the community, her leadership as a scientist, particularly at a time when that was an incredibly difficult task as a woman. And I was fascinated. I was really excited to hear all that she had to say. And as my first enthusiastic person to meet me, I was really glad that this trip was starting off on a great foot. I said, okay, so let's go visit your meeting. And she said, yeah, let's do it. And I got up and I went to follow her, and she went to follow me. And I said, so we'll go in your car, right? And she said, no, I don't have a car. And I said, so how are we going to get to the meeting house? And she said, oh, well, we'll go on your motorcycle. And I said, I don't have a helmet. I don't have a second helmet for you. There's no helmet law in Florida, she says. I said, well, but maybe there's public transportation. No, public transportation's horrible in this town. People give me rides everywhere. I said, well, what would your children or grandchildren think? And it was almost like she was ready with responses to each of these questions. She said, my children have already decided that I'm going to die falling off the back of an elephant. So if I fall off the back of your motorcycle in St. Petersburg, that's better. It'll be less inconvenient for my family. So with that, she put on her little bandana, wrapped me around the waist, and we began to tour across St. Petersburg, much of which is cobbled, I would point out. She waved, she loved it. She was waving to people, there was honking, and so really began my journey among friends. And so I can almost certainly tell you, while I was having that experience, I knew it was transformative. I knew that would be the kind of thing that I would absolutely tell my own grandchildren. And it was really a gift that she gave me. And it was truly through her own force of will that it even happened, because I might have been inspired by what she shared with me and what she described. But by forcing me to drive her across town on a motorcycle, I really got my first taste of how transformative this experience was going to be for me. So from there, we toured some meetings in Florida, and then headed up into, and I left her behind, but when visited, she did not come with me the rest of the journey. But I then began to continue up the eastern seaboard into South Carolina, and found myself driving into rural South Carolina to the home of Judith Yarborough. So Judith Yarborough was another person who'd written a little bit later, but she seemed like a really interesting person as well, very kind and hospitable, but I didn't know a whole lot about her. I pulled up to her very classic southern house in rural South Carolina, white picket fence, flowers in the pots. I should note that all of this journey was happening much around this time of the year, in the summer of 2005, so exactly 20 years ago is when I was taking this trip. And so I pull up to Judith's house, and she comes out to greet me on the porch with an apron and a pitcher of sweet tea, and invites me into her home. And it's just such a classic southern scene. There's live moss hanging from the trees. She's got this thick South Carolinian accent. We walk in through her door and the screen door, and all of the walls of her house have photos of Indian gurus from like floor to ceiling, not just casual amount of gurus, but significant presence of spiritual leaders from that tradition. She made no particular notice or emphasis of this fact. Began to continue to make niceties, asked about how the road had been, noticed how hot it was out and everything. And I just played along for the most part until at a certain point I just could not help but ask, Judith, who are these? Are these members of your family? And she told me a fascinating story. That she was born there in near Conway, South Carolina, and had spent all of her young life as an active participant in the Baptist church there, but had felt that something was a little off, that wasn't exactly her spiritual home. And so she had continued to explore what might be out there and had gone to the public library to look for library books about what other faith traditions there might be, and happened to begin to find some books on Eastern traditions and Eastern mysticism. Until eventually she got more and more interested in this mysticism, began to do further research until she decided that she was going to go to an ashram in India as the first time she left her county in her entire life. So she got her passport and everything to leave her county. This is at least the way she told it to me. And spent some time on an ashram, at which time she then continued to go back and really deeply explored Eastern mysticism and followed a couple of different religious teachers, took that part of her spiritual development very seriously, until again she described that she began to feel that something was a little off, and that this was not exactly her home. And at that point she decided that she would return to her home county again and continue to research to eventually find Quakerism, which she described as closer to her tribe of Southern Baptists. So it helped her to kind of marry her experience of growing up as Southern Baptist and this new exploration in her life of Eastern mysticism, and then Quakerism helped her bridge that experience. So that was another really amazing experience of hearing somebody's personal testimony of transformation. She was right about here. So I continued on my journey, and by this time I had gone many hours and many hot days. My camera, which was supposed to be a means of documenting this journey, was stolen off the back of my motorcycle. I had a couple of near misses, which are quite understandable on such a dangerous piece of equipment. But I felt like I had a mission and I needed to complete it. So I trudged on up out into the Outer Banks here. I took a ferry ride across to the Outer Banks and found myself chatting with another motorcyclist as I went across on the ferry. And I told him a little bit about my trip. And at that point, I myself was beginning to wane in my enthusiasm, I will admit. And this guy said, well, you got a motorcycle, and I'll tell you what, I'm just coming back from Iraq, and another option for you is you could just go into making money. Like, you seem to be really committed and well-meaning, but this is another option. I've gotten incredibly rich through having, worked my contacts after the Iraq War. Kid, you're young. It felt like the kind of the plastics conversation. Don't go the religion route, go the making money route. I had this experience of being kind of tested on my spiritual journey. Like maybe this is I could not handle that kind of message at that moment, or the doubts that I was dealing with. So I made it a little off the ferry. It was beginning to get dark. I had not yet gotten to my destination for the evening. I parked my motorcycle on the side of the road, and I just sat there. And this passage from Kings was not on my mind at that time, but speaks to that condition that I was feeling. This real sense of discouragement, of why did I do this? Is this really what I should be doing? And it was 4th of July. So fireworks were going off everywhere, the explosions, the fire, the metaphorical wind and rending of rocks. And I just stared into the chrome of my motorcycle. There was so much chrome, which for a Quaker is challenging. And I saw the flashes and bursts of light reflecting off of it. And as a lifelong friend, I've always thought of the metaphor of light as this important quality of our faith. And it was interesting that I was staring there at this chrome and this dead thing that had in fact taken me so far at that point. And I realized that even it could reflect light. Even this machine, which had no soul, and certainly was not reflecting God's light, could, in its inanimate state, reflect some light. And honestly, at that point, that was sort of the best that I could imagine myself doing. Even if I do not feel clear at this moment about only halfway on my journey about what I set out to do, maybe that was something. And so actually that moment there on the side of the road, a little bit like this passage from Kings, maybe that was a bit of the still small voice coming to me saying, nope, you've got to get back on, you've got to keep going. So I got back on, and I am glossing over many amazing people and amazing experiences, but I went up through the Outer Banks into the Eastern Shore, gorgeous, gorgeous territory. Southern New Jersey, much more beautiful than you think. To eventually drive up to the home of Thurston Hughes. So Thurston Hughes was another early adopter to my project, also very excited about it. I pulled up to his house in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, which is just outside of New York. And it was fairly empty. He was simply there. It was a small little bungalow, but covered in Hawaiian wood sculptures. There were tropical birds carved out of wood. There were hanging flower baskets made of clearly tropical wood. There were aloha signs. So I was very curious. So, but I was calling and calling, wandering around this house, not seeing anybody, until eventually a man wearing only a pair of shorts came out of the woods and said, "Hello, I am Thurston," in a very thick German accent. I'm going to spare you my German accent impression. These are the days where all of the communication up until this point had been through either email or actual letters. So I had no idea to expect Thurston having a German accent. And he welcomes me in, and he is yet another fascinating person, and he tells me his life story. Thurston was born in Nazi Germany and was a member of the Hitler Youth to then be recruited into the Nazi army very young. And again, similar to friends Judith and Jerry, had felt some doubts about what he was participating in, or felt a little outside of the norm, had been recruited. The SS had made an effort to recruit him at a certain point, and he said that he was not interested in the SS. And they said, well, that's okay. We don't want cowards in the SS. And he said, time will tell who the real cowards are. This apparently got him sent immediately to the front line, and he was quickly captured and sent on to Siberia, where luckily, along the way, a Russian nurse, took pity on him, said that he reminded her of her daughter, her son, who was also a soldier in the war, and she sent him off and sneaked him in with a Quaker ambulance. So through connecting with friends, he began to then go back into Germany and help with saving lives through the ambulance unit, and as a German speaker could help interface in ways that many folks were not able to as easily do. So he said that this was a profoundly transformational experience for him, and eventually he decided, when he wanted to leave Germany, to become a Quaker and come to the United States, where he became a successful investment banker. And he just exuded this amazing spirit. I had been sent to him as a possible donor to Guilford College, actually. Max had suggested I meet him. And he told me that he really wanted to see particular kinds of students in the Guilford QLSP program. Students from Iceland, students from Costa Rica, and Hawaiian native students. And I asked, why in particular? Because Iceland is a country of peace. Costa Rica has no standing military, and Hawaii brought us the spirit of aloha. And I just was so struck that he was very clear. I said, is there any possibility there might be some flexibility? We don't really have that many people from those different. Nope, this is what I want to support. And so I found that these people who I'm decided to particularly share with you about, of all of the amazing people who I met on this journey, Thurston was up here in Massachusetts.
And with that, yeah.
Provided in some ways cornerstones around this amazingly transformational experience. And so at FWCC, we work on trying to offer those kinds of transformational experiences for people through gatherings, through intervisitation, through cross-cultural exchange. I really return to the ways in which I would respond to these challenges that were placed for us in the passage from Romans. I see themes in that journey for myself that could be ways that we might imagine renewing and transforming Quakerism, our own lives. An important part for me is listening to that still small voice. I heard in Judith's story, in Jerry's story, and Thurston's story that there was still small voices in the midst of really chaotic moments for some of them, or tremendously rigid moments for others, that encourage them to try something different, encourage them to think differently. As somebody shared before, I saw that each of them also put themselves physically outside of their comfort zones. That they were willing to travel, they were willing to study, they were willing to learn new languages and new faiths in order to really deeply try to see how God was calling them to act. And this was profoundly inspirational for me as a young Quaker person. Unfortunately, I set myself up with such an ambitious task for myself on this journey that ultimately I walked away from that journey very discouraged. I was a part of this Quaker Leadership Scholars Program, and an important part of the journey was supposed to be figuring out how I would be a leader in Quakerism. 20 years later, I don't really know exactly how I got to where I am today. I don't actually think it was a clear or linear path. But I think about that experience of that journey as really a first and important step for me in my personal journey towards this experience of leadership, towards this pathway of transformation and renewal. Some of the key things that I think might be important parts of it for myself, but also for others of us within Quakerism, were considering the young amongst us, considering that I was at a period in my life where I was ready to try new things. And I hear in some of what we've been sharing in these days that we could do more to potentially consider and support young people in their paths. Just as we explored even in the songs earlier in multilingual context, also through this journey and more of what I'll share tomorrow, I think intercultural experiences are really important. I think in getting outside of our home culture, our home way of thinking and being, really allows us to start on a pathway towards transformation. I also think, getting all the way back to that passage from Romans, at times as friends, we can become a little perfectionistic. That we have to make way as way opens, and sometimes that's just good enough for now and safe enough to try. And again, as a community organizer, more than a biblical scholar or a pastor, I think it's really important for us to just try at times. And so with that, I'm going to come to our next activity. You've seen me demonstrating what I will now challenge each of us to try. So we've been here about a day, 24 hours. We've got a few more days left. And I'm going to challenge us to take a little experiment together. So on the back of all of your programs, you have a map of Quaker Lake. I don't want you to just copy this map. This is a good starting place. If you're ever in doubt about where you are, you can look back at this map. But what I'd like you to do is take the back of your program folder and make your own little map of Quaker Haven. You don't have to be an artist. I promise. And in fact, I'm going to demonstrate. I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I won't do myself. So this map is going to be very simple, very simple. And the idea here is that we're going to map our experience in these days together. Oh, I got it. So this map will be our kind of template for exploring a new way of looking at our time and our space here together. So I'm going to demonstrate. So here we've got the lake. Let's say this is the dining hall. It's easy for me because I'm sleeping right there, but maybe you sleep a little further away. This is the chapel. These are benches over by the lake. So it can be really basic, but you've been here about a day, and you've probably set up some routines. Obviously, much of what you've done has been following the program, but maybe you've come back here after many years. This is a new experience for all of us being back here at Quaker Haven. Those of us who may have been here campers long ago, those of us who are coming for the first time. In any case, this is new for all of us. But I'm going to invite us to take it one step further here as we make this map. So you'll do something similar to this, and you'll think about how you've been in this space over the last day. Maybe you've walked from your dorm area to the food place, and you've walked over to the chapel and back to your dorm. Maybe you've taken a swim in the lake, maybe not. But maybe you're curious about something that's happening over here. Or maybe you notice that there's so many Amish people over here, but you haven't spoken to any of them. Or maybe you have no idea what's over in this part. And this is my challenge to you between this evening and tomorrow evening. That I'd like you to come up with one experiment about some way to be in this space that's different than how you've been in this first day. Questions up till this point? I'll explain a little more. Okay, so it can be as simple as, I've often taken this path, but I'm actually just going to go around this path when I go between one building or another. I might encourage you to take it a little step further. I know in the children's program, for example, they're using a Quaker Earth Care Witness program, where they're being asked to find a sit spot, where somewhere on this property, they're going to be invited to go and sit and just reflect and be in that space and hear what they hear and connect with the nature around them. That sounds like a very camp experience, and I invite you to consider something along any of those lines. Speaking of the Amish friends who are here, I realize they're here. I realize that I'm getting to know many of you, and it's fairly easy for me to go up and say hello to each of you. It's a little harder for me to do it to them, because I don't even have anything in common necessarily. I hear many of them speaking a different language, for example. That could be something you might try to do. So that is, I know, a little bit unusual, maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but that's my challenge to you. Draw yourself your map on the back of your program or somewhere that you would prefer, and give yourself one challenge that I will not obligate you to share with the whole group tomorrow, but maybe in small groups you might speak a little bit about that experience with others, which will lead into our further conversation about group transformation as we share what we experience as some of this personal transformation and experimentation with our own experience. This comes from something that we're trying out in FWCC right now. Jade is leading our new program called Quaker Connect, which is actually a program that we received a Lilly grant to organize amongst meetings all over the section from Alaska to Bolivia. And the idea of this program is to try slightly longer experiments. So the idea with this program is to, with your meeting, study and explore and develop the idea for an experiment that would last maybe a few months. But I recognize that in order for us to try these transformational or renewal experiences, we need to start somewhere. And at times, it's getting, this is just really simple, just potentially not so meaningful in and of itself. But I'd like to try to challenge us to get a little outside of our comfort zone and try something that we may not have expected as the next step for our activity tomorrow. Another place that we can start, if you are interested, because it may be that something like this just at the Quaker camp feels less meaningful than on the grander scale, is that I've also brought these other maps so that you could do something similar to what I have described on my journey. Perhaps you've had important journeys in the United States on this map over here, or on the map of Indiana that I brought over here. More and more maps are less a part of our lives. We punch in where we want to go on Google, and it tells us directly. We don't even look at the larger space or context. It just tells us, turn left, turn right. You may see a little bit of the feature around you, but it was actually pretty difficult for me to find these maps to bring to you to do this activity today. And that's another important part of what I think it is for us as a religious community to see ourselves. We're working on a digital map project for Quakers, which is indeed digital, but we will print as we have a more complete picture. We hope your meeting might be on that map. And so, for example, I have brought more of these little stickers, similar to what I put on mine, and I invite you to use those to use them to point to particularly important places where you have had similarly transformative experiences, met important people along the way, either in Indiana or across the United States. And so that's what these arrow stickers are for, similar to what I described to you and what I shared this evening. Because I see that we have some challenge with color coding, I had multiple different colors of arrows, but we're going to use two different kinds of stickers actually. These are for transformational experiences, particular points of people you've met or experiences you've had that have been very meaningful in Iowa, in Indiana, or in the United States. These are for sort of key places that we started. This could be your meeting. This could be where you're born. And you can place those on the map as well. So circles will be the places that we start, and arrows will be important moments of transformation along the way. Questions? Reflections? Thoughts? All right, well, thank you, friends. I invite us to try this out together. I recognize it's a little unorthodox, but we're at camp. We're trying something a little bit unusual, being here, trying something a little bit more experimental. I invite you to try this out with me, and tomorrow we're going to explore it a little bit further together. So if all hearts and minds are clear, I invite us to settle down for a little bit of worship to close.
Thank you, friends. Thank you to Evan for the presentation. I will encourage you again to engage with the maps a little bit here. We are going to be starting the popcorn pop very shortly down at the lake shore. The canteen